What is the ERP state? Why do you need to code your customers' masters items? Why do you need to restructure your bombs? Why do you need to redesign your part numbers? That becomes a very, very, very difficult argument. They just don't get it. And sometimes they are going to say, hey, I'm not looking to change all of that.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hello, hey everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you may be joining from. So for today's webinar, we are going to talk about ERP readiness. And we are going to provide a little bit of framework based on what we have seen, in our engagements. But before we do that, we are going to start with everybody's intros. So quick information about me as well as Elevate IQ. Sam Gupta, principal here. Elevate IQ is the independent technology advisory firm. We help our clients with technology strategy, change management, as well as system selection. On that note, Shrestha, do you want to introduce quickly?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Sam. Hi, everyone. My name is Shrestha Das, and I'm working as an industry research analyst at Elevate IQ. And it's a pleasure to be here today, Sam. Thank you for inviting.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here. Always learning from you, Shrestha. And in the audience, we would love to hear a little bit more about you as well, wherever you may be joining from, and whatever you may feel comfortable sharing. Again, the best place to send over any sort of comments, questions, any experiences would be in the chat box or Q&A. A little bit about our webinar series. We have many flavors of webinars that we generally do. And the best way to get updated about those would be on our events and webinar page that you can find on elevateiq.com. I believe that is the third menu. The first option on the third menu is events and webinar. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. We send a lot of notifications there, so that could be another option to get updated about the future webinars. We have many different vendors coming in. They are going to do their own demos, so they have their side of story, and then we do a lot of different reviews. This particular webinar is more about the methodology, process, etc. So on that note, I'll get started. I'm going to share my screen. Shrestha, whenever you can see, you can probably confirm. If you can see it, just 1 second. Let me do this. Are you able to see it?
Yeah, now I can. Okay,
perfect. Hopefully everybody can see. If you're not able to see, just comment on the Q&A box, and we'll try to help you. I guess the traditional view of ERP selection, if you look at the way community like to perceive, 90% of the companies, the way they are going to do ERP selection is slightly different. Generally, their approach is going to be one system centric. They look at everything from one system, but generally, in most of the cases, you are going to have many different systems. You have to align what ERP means for your organization. So that's where the whole readiness exercise becomes handy. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But overall, if you look at the traditional approaches of ERP selection, you are going to have a checklist, and the checklist is going to have a bunch of must-have, nice to have, etc. And that becomes more of the prioritization list as opposed to looking at more from the implementation lenses, the kind of factors that are going to be relevant when you look at data quality issues, when you look at migration issues, when you look at any sort of integration problems, and those are the ones in our mind should be the priority from the ERP selection perspective. That is generally ignored. The kind of ERP selection methodology that is promoted over the internet is very simplified version of ERP selection. In our experience, those ERP selection projects generally struggle, fail, just because they don't look at this more from the implementation lenses. So the very common approach that we see in the market is just one-click checklist download. You have like million checklists available on the internet. You can easily download. It's going to have a bunch of requirement list, nice to have, must have, etc. But again, that's a very simplified version, one system view of ERP selection. And once you have decided, okay, what you want to do from the ERP perspective, and if it is going to be pure play selection, then it's much easier to do using that approach. But the readiness exercise that we are talking about, we are looking at, the kind of model that you need to build, the kind of prep you need to do before you can move to that phase. And that's the conversation we are talking today. So generally, the reason why companies approach it that way is, if you look at a lot of ERP strategy consulting firms in the market, they have very limited expertise on enterprise architecture. And enterprise architecture is going to be the second phase of the target operating model once you have decided. So first you have to decide that. Obviously, a lot of companies talk about designing target operating model from the business process perspective, but your enterprise architecture and the system centric view is going to be equally relevant in the strategy phase. That is something in our experience is missing from a lot of different vendors and the ERP strategy firms, just because they don't have hands-on implementation experience. And that's why they look at this more from the, hey, I'm going to have a bunch of requirements, going to do must have, nice have, going to select, and then hopefully vendors can figure out the architecture. Vendors can figure out this more from the implementation lenses. In that approach, the problem that you are going to run into is the kind of contract or SOW you are going to get from the vendors. They are making a lot of assumptions. You are making a lot of assumptions, and because of that, the contracts are going to be all over the place. You are probably going to find a lot of different cost overruns, delays with these projects, and that's the state that we have with the most of the ERP projects. If you do the readiness exercise beforehand, then you are probably not going to run into as many issues. So that's what most of the companies do. They simply offload these decisions to vendor, and again, they are looking at this more from the just one system mindset, which generally struggles, especially today. You are going to have many different systems, and even sometimes when companies think that, hey, I am looking at SAP, I am looking at Microsoft Dynamics 365, whichever name you want to pick, it doesn't matter. But generally, even in that umbrella, you are going to have many different add-ons, many different ISVs that are going to be involved, and you need to figure out, okay, how their features and functionalities overlap, how the master data governance patterns would be when you are going to implement this. So that's the kind of readiness exercise we are talking about. You need to look at your own processes, data, but you also need to look at the operating model of the software and perform a little bit of gap analysis to figure out what are going to be the real success factors for you from the implementation perspective. If you do that, then your chances of success are probably going to be higher. So this was more from the vendor issues perspective. Then you also have the skill set issues, and that is going to be more from the customer perspective. They have their own sort of mindset, philosophy, beliefs. Because of that, there are a lot of challenges with these projects. So their focus is going to be, the way they like to approach this is more of the commoditized procurement, and any sort of commoditized items that you are buying over the internet, you are going to have, okay, need number one, need number two, need number three, priority number one, priority number two, priority number three. Great, works for when you are buying a laptop, but not necessarily for the ERP kind of software or any software that are going to be slightly more cross-functional in nature, where the success would be dependent upon the quality of your processes, quality of your data, consensus between your team, your understanding of different ERP taxonomy. When you have those dependencies, then the traditional selection approach does not work, for these kind of engagements. um, Ignores current customization. You have to figure out the change management path for the current customization as well. If you don't have that, then you are probably going to struggle. You need to figure out, okay, when you have these customizations, what are you going to do with them? Are you going to retain, retire, rewire, whatever you are going to do? In the current state, they might work very well, but in the new state, for example, let's say if you go to any sort of cloud native software or AI native software, then the state is going to be very different. So you need to rethink, redesign all of that. If you have not done that in the strategy phase, again, you are probably going to run into challenges. This is a misconception overall. Again, companies, we talk to a lot of different customers. They say that, hey, our problem is, I don't know, Microsoft Dynamics 365. We get into the engagement and then we are looking at there, and the only thing that they have is maybe Aptean. Aptean is the ISV on top of Microsoft Dynamics 365. From their perspective, they are looking at that, okay, this is a Microsoft problem. It is not a Microsoft problem because they are going to have 2000 different add-ons, and they have not analyzed the state, they have not analyzed the IP, who controls the code, and whether you are going to have access to all of that or not. So again, when you have any sort of add-ons customizations on top of the core software, that becomes a very unique state, and you need to analyze all of that to come up with the qualified recommendation whether the new system is going to work with all of those customizations and add-ons, and what you are going to do with that. And even if it works, then you have to still look at it from the adoption lenses, how, whether users are going to be happy with it, what kind of process changes that you have to make. So you have to worry about all of that. And again, commoditized procurement is probably the best example that I can provide. When you do the traditional selection, it looks at in a very commoditized way, and that's where the major challenges are. I'll move to the next slide unless you guys have any questions, comments here. So again, we are talking about some of the problems of these checklist-driven approaches. A lot of times what the customers feel is, okay, I have one comment here. Okay, thank you so much. And I struggle to see the names here. Sorry, I think Gianluca, and I don't even know how you pronounce your name. So I'm so sorry about that, but welcome. Thank you so much for joining. So here, some of the problems that we are talking about with the traditional selection methodology that you are going to find on the internet, everybody talks about it, that is overly promoted. Sometimes that is promoted by affiliate marketing companies. Sometimes that is promoted by vendors. They have their own checklist as well. They are trying to position these checklists so that the checklists are going to be aligned to their capabilities. So you need to be careful when you look at any sort of checklists in the market. Look at the sources where they are coming from. And if vendors are prescribing, that's probably not the best strategy for you, just because it is going to ignore pretty much everything else that we are going to discuss today in terms of ERP readiness. And again, the software is not necessarily going to be a problem. It's going to be your own processes, data, skill set. That's where the real play is. You need to align all of that before you select any sort of software. In this case, we are talking about ERP, but for other process-centric, business process-centric software, they might have similar challenges as well. And again, when we talk about state design, when you do the prioritization list, that can help you with priority of these requirements, but that doesn't give you a real state. And when we talk about state, we are talking about financial feasibility, we are talking about timeliness feasibility, we are talking about technical feasibility as well. I know that there are always going to be black boxes and surprises and blind spots with these things, but the more you are going to do in the strategy phase, the fewer surprises you are going to get in the implementation phase. So that's what is the idea of state design, and the whole readiness phase is about state design that is going to be from the business process perspective, from the enterprise architecture, from data readiness perspective, whatever data sets you have, you need to look at pretty much everything. You need to align taxonomy. Again, we'll talk about all of that in just a second in detail. Um, okay, so it's the correct pronunciation. Okay, so it's probably Gianluca. So thank you so much for joining again. I always struggle with names. I'm really sorry, especially with the newer ones. So here, the next point is, okay, what they ignore. So overall, when you talk about the scope residency, and when you talk about scope residency, it's going to be, okay, what kind of functionality that you are going to store in each of the system category, how they are going to interact, what kind of documents are you sending, what is the state of those documents, is it going to be source of authority, or is it going to be replicated only for the execution function? When you are sort of all over the place where multiple systems are acting as source of authority, that's where you are going to run into a lot of challenges. Okay, what they ignore is integration workflows. They simply assume that integration is some sort of technical problem and that can be resolved in the implementation phase. Vendors can figure this out. Now, if you don't have your integration workflows figured out, there is no way you can estimate a project. Okay, you are signing an open checkbook, blank checkbook, and you are going to get substantial surprises. And that's where you see in the market that, okay, the ERP implementations have gone 5x, 7x. That's very real, just because you are only going to know the effort once you are into designing these workflows, mapping these workflows, understanding what kind of data fields do you need to exchange. And it doesn't matter how good or how capable technology is, even with AI, you need to do the readiness exercise. If you don't do that, nobody in this world can estimate how long and how much that project is going to cost, or how long it is going to take. And obviously migration readiness as well. And migration is, again, this is not just the data migration or technical migration. You are talking about process migration as well. You need to figure out each of the migration step and figure out if your users are going to be okay. Obviously, the users will know when they have started using the system, but by that time it might be too late. If they don't like it, they are going to hijack, they are going to move to the spreadsheets. So those are the kind of challenges that we are talking about, but this is very well ignored with the traditional selection methodology. And obviously, the result is going to be over customization, overages, and slippage. I'm pretty sure everybody, even like executives, if they have done even one implementation, they'll probably know this, how painful this process is. Even today, again, it doesn't matter how capable technology is, you are probably going to see a lot of this. So checklist, when you follow that traditional selection methodology, it only captures the functional state. It does not capture the whole chemistry, and that chemistry is where the play is from the ERP perspective. So ERP readiness is figuring out that chemistry. I'll keep moving here. I'll go to the next slide unless you guys have any other questions, comments here. So core questions that you need to ask, and this is where the problem starts. Okay, when we start any sort of engagements, we are going to ask customers, okay, do you have your objectives? Everybody is going to claim that yeah, they know the kind of objectives they want to accomplish, but when you look at them, those objectives are all over the place. They have not gone through some sort of smart methodology, which is going to be S stands for specific, M is measurable, A is what is that? A is adapt. No, specific, measurable. Somebody needs to help me here. I don't know, Strasta, if you remember, or anybody in the audience, but I'm missing the A. You can Google smart. R is realistic. T is timely. A is, I believe, attainable, I guess. So these are the factors that you need to use when you are looking at any sort of objectives. And if they don't pass this criteria, then you are probably going to run into challenges. So it all starts with the objectives. But once you have your objectives figured out, what you are trying to do, from the project perspective, then the next thing you need to do is, okay, what are those compelling reasons? And if the reasons are not necessarily compelling enough, then you don't want to do an ERP project, because it's supposed to be a grueling journey. And again, if you don't have that, then it's very hard to stay motivated. Your users are most likely going to withdraw. So find those reasons. And if you don't have those, maybe you are not ready for the ERP project. Thank you so much, Rasta. So it is achievable, is what it is, right?
This is the right one, right?
relevant and time bound. That's right one. So attainable, achievable, however you want to put that. But that's the sense. Thank you so much, Strasta. Always helpful. So again, so you need to ask, okay, why are you doing ERP? What's ERP for you personally? But what you need to ask is, for each of the department, they are going to have different versions of ERPs in their head, and they don't know how to articulate that vision, but their expectations are very different than what you might be thinking of, what might be on paper. So that's where you need to build consensus in terms of what is ERP for them. The more you are going to document, the more alignment you are going to have before you sign any sort of contract, implement. And if you don't have that alignment, then sometimes it's just too late when you sign the contract or go live. That's where you see a lot of challenges from the change management, from adoption perspective. So align the story. Everybody is going to have very, very, very different story, whether you talk about your own internal users, executives, stakeholders, external partners, technical vendors, any sort of strategy vendors. Everybody has different expectations, what they are trying to achieve. And generally there is very limited alignment, and that's where the majority of these struggles are. And that is the core intent of the readiness phase. Okay, so generally, if you don't have anything documented, it's just going to be extremely blurred vision. There is no sort of clarity in general. And even if you document, there are a lot of different assumptions. But at least when you document, then people will be able to talk their minds out. Hopefully, they can identify all of the blind spots and assumptions with that documentation as well. But that requires very deep subject matter expertise to be able to spot those red flags early on. So generally, the state that they are going to have is they are going to have extremely patchy story. And when you start with the patchy story, you are probably going to get very patchy implementation and very patchy adoption as well. It's garbage in, garbage out. So that's where you need to align the whole story. Okay. And aligning the story requires aligning it from technical lenses, from financial lenses. Technical lenses might be difficult in the strategy phase because you don't have the target state yet. Financial state might be challenging as well because you don't know what you are going to get as part of your licenses. What is going to be the cost. So these are extremely hard questions. Again, that requires proprietary knowledge, subject matter expertise that most people don't have. Even if they claim they do, it's challenging. Okay, so that's what you want to do in the readiness phase as much as possible. You will not be 100% right, but let's say even if you are 70, 80, 90% right, then you are not going to have as many surprises. The whole process of this would be kind of a script writing, the way you would design movie or scenes for a movie. Generally the whole process is script writing. That's what you are doing in this. In 90% of the cases, what companies do is they don't do any sort of script writing, and they want to figure out as they go. Obviously script writing requires a lot more mental power that you need to use. And that's a very abstract problem that you need to solve. So it becomes very uncomfortable journey for users as well as for people who are helping with that process. But again, this is supposed to be chicken and egg, so it's going to be extremely difficult, but you need to do this if you don't want any sort of surprises in the selection as well as implementation phase. And that's the intent of ERP readiness. Okay, I'll keep moving here unless you guys have any questions, comments. Okay, so the next one. So this is going to be more from the state perspective. This is going to be your as is state alignment to be state alignment. And if you speak in the community, if you talk about, okay, how do you do state alignment or the operating model alignment, they are going to say, hey, you have to document every single process in very deep detail. If you do that, it's probably going to take 2-3 years. So you cannot do that. By that time, the market is going to change, the technology landscape is going to change, and the system that you are thinking and the context that you have taken may be outdated as well. So again, the intent of a state alignment is not necessarily to create a 2-year project. Okay, what you need to do is you need to look at bare minimum and take sort of the MVP approach for these things. That okay, when you are looking at workarounds, what is the gap based on current workaround? Where are the deviations? And when you look at those deviations, you need to align it with the taxonomy of the enterprise software. Again, that requires very deep subject matter expertise, understanding the target operating model of different systems that you want to evaluate. But what you want to do is at least the bare minimum analysis of how you are going to design the scope of each of the workarounds that you have. And the challenges that you are going to run into is the current workarounds that you have. Everybody's going to have extremely limited understanding of those workarounds. And I mean, they don't even know what is sitting inside those workarounds, and that's where you don't have the state alignment among your teams. So the first exercise is going to be to build those clarifying the understanding of the current workarounds, as well as developing better understanding, and that's the intent of as is state. And again, taxonomy is very critical. What you mean by project may be completely different from what the vendors are thinking about project. Even though the same keyword is mentioned inside the contract, it could have very different meaning. So that's where you need to align these taxonomy. If you don't align, you are going to have pricing, licensing surprises, etc. So that's the intent of as is state alignment. However you define your project, let's document that. What is the structure of that project? How that is structured at this point of time, and how different that is going to be from the enterprise software taxonomy perspective. You need to align all of that. 90% of the people that might be employed by a company, they generally have very limited understanding of the cross-functional use cases or cross-functional implications, just because these teams don't talk to each other. The only common thread between these teams is probably going to be CEO. Especially with the smaller companies. In the larger companies, you are going to have executives, but they might be far off, I guess, from the ground reality. So you just don't have as much alignment from the cross-functional perspective. So the whole intent of as is state is to align that. And then what it is going to give you is the shared language, shared taxonomy that you are going to have, and that you are going to use to build the to be state. If you don't have that, you don't have a real language that you can follow along. And generally, with the to be state, the learning curve is going to be so hard. If a company has never operated in the ERP state, for them understanding what is the ERP state, why do you need to code your customers masters items, why do you need to restructure your bombs, why do you need to redesign your part numbers, that becomes a very, very, very difficult argument. They just don't get it. And sometimes they are going to say, hey, I'm not looking to change all of that. Okay, I don't want to change my processes. And that's where the problems start, because it might be too much of a lift for the target system if you are going to be too off from their intended state. Okay, and then you are going to get into the over engineering, overloading of the system, and then you are going to have a lot of different issues, whether this is going to be system performance or just the overarching adoption. You are going to run into all of those issues. So the intent of to be state would be, whatever you want to do with your current workarounds. Generally, if you look at the traditional selection methodology, what they are going to do is just kill all of those workarounds. We are going to take very monolithic approach, and we are going to shove everything inside the system. That approach does not work as well. Okay, you don't want to shove everything, because sometimes the processes or systems may be too different, and that's where you need to analyze what needs to be part of the core. And core is a buzzword in itself, but when I say core, meaning consolidated processes, what kind of processes need to be consolidated versus what can be best of breed. So that's going to be much deeper analysis that you need to analyze based on the enterprise software categories, as well as the way your processes are structured at this point of time. So you need to decide whether you are going to retain, retire, or rewire. You need to analyze all of that. And the state of these legacy workloads will dictate what is going to be the state of your ERP. And you need to decide that before you select any sort of ERP, because if you don't have that defined, then again, you'll run into challenges. And technical and financial feasibility of the requirements. And sometimes that's very hard to ascertain, especially if you don't have the target system defined. Sometimes it might be harder to get expertise internally as well, because the pricing, licensing, the software model is changing on a daily basis. So how do you do that? Again, your goal is to be as closer as possible. You will never be 100% right, but again, your goal is to be as closer as possible. here, when you look at any of the custom components, you still need to decide whether you are going to rebuild them or build them, or it's going to be buy. I think there is a problem here. There's supposed to be buy. So that's going to be buy versus build decision. When you are going to build something, obviously you are going to have a lot more flexibility in general in how you want to design the system. But any shortcuts or workarounds that you are going to take, if that state is not necessarily aligned with the enterprise software dictionary, the way enterprise software categories align their data and processes, that's where you are going to run into a lot of challenges, deviations. So even if you're building, you still want to align the core state with the enterprise software taxonomy. And when you try to align that, obviously that will require changing your processes. But if you are not willing to change that, obviously you are going to build something very, very, very custom that is going to be very different from how enterprise software community operates. And then tomorrow, let's say if you want to replace that, then that is probably going to disrupt pretty much everything from your enterprise architecture. So again, our recommendation would be standardize, streamline as much as possible. Even if you are building that, try to change your business processes as much as possible. The goal of to be state is also to figure out critical success factors. So when you look at traditional selection methodology, they are going to have critical success factor, but they are going to be some sort of feature rush that you are looking at, feature number 1, feature number 2, feature number 3, and sometimes people become kind of greedy with those features. I want everything in this money. uh, and that becomes a problem because those requirements are not necessarily going to be technically or financially feasible. So you are looking at this more from the manageable lenses. What can you afford to implement? That's what you need to pay attention to. So again, these critical success factors that you are going to get from the target state perspective, one thing that you are going to do is, number one, you are going to align with the scope of the ERP, state of the ERP, and then figure out, okay, what are the critical success factors given this state that we have already agreed with every single user stakeholders, and they all agree that we are building this. And based on that, you are going to decide, okay, these are my critical success factors, and those should be the driving factors whenever you are looking at RFP or the selection phase. That is probably going to be the second phase that is going to follow the readiness exercise. Okay, and some of the change implications, and they have nothing to do with technology. These change implications could be, hey, you need to change your SKUs, or you need to change your lot numbers. Now those lot numbers could be communicated to your customers, to be communicated to your regulatory bodies. If you have all of that, generally that change is massive for most companies, and in most cases companies are going to say, hey, I cannot afford to change that. And if you have that, then you are probably going to run into challenges again. So even if that is going to be a constraint, you need to analyze your model, what kind of impact you are going to have from the technical perspective. If you're not willing to change, that's okay. If you don't have to change everything, but you still have to analyze how your target operating model is going to change. Based on that, what are going to be risks and dependencies, and what is going to be financial cost given the new constraint, what is the gap there, and based on that gap, let's say if the additional cost is going to be, I don't know, maybe $500,000 just because of this constraint, are you okay with that? So again, if you do this more in terms of dollars, then people understand that minor change could be very expensive to we really want to do that. So you need to get at that level to be able to decide whether those constraints would still make sense in the new operating model as well as architecture. I'll keep moving here. So these are going to be some of the behavioral, issues, and they are related to your skill set. I'll remove these red lines here. So here, some things, current workarounds, again, how married to them. And if most of the people are going to be married to those current workarounds, they will not change. Okay. So again, you need to look at resistance. Your goal should be to remove those as much as possible because they generally disrupt the ERP state. But sometimes people are not willing to get convinced. They might have their own beliefs, reservations. And if they are not willing to change, even if you implement ERP, they are going to move back to those workarounds. They'll not appreciate it. Okay. So understand how much resistance you are going to face and how married are they to those workarounds and what are their drivers. And again, if you can do something from incentive perspective, you can motivate them, you can assign them somewhere else, I guess. So that's going to be up to you what is possible. if the person who is driving these projects, if they are married to those workarounds, then there is not much you can do about it. So then you have to use that as a constraint, and you have to design your target state based on those constraints. Now, solution preferences, and this would be, hey, I only want SAP, I only want Microsoft, I only want Epicor, something along those lines. Okay, so that becomes a constraint in your target operating model as well, because you are kind of biased and you are not willing to negotiate for whatever reason. That's completely okay. That's your preference. You want that, but again, you need to design your model around those constraints. Okay, understand your power control centers, and if you don't have that, okay, then you are going to have a lot of issues. Okay, who's controlling it? Okay, sometimes we do these engagements, we spend 4 months, and all of a sudden an executive is going to come and they are going to say, no, 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 that's not happening. I mean, they have not gone through the entire process, they change everything. Okay, now they don't necessarily understand the implications. Obviously, if you are able to communicate the implications, that could take forever. They will probably not make those decisions, but they are rushing, they don't have the same attention span as the other folks, and that's where you run into those issues. So analyze those power control centers, who is controlling the process, and if they are going to have specific reservations or resistance, then there is no way around that. Unless you control the power, then you'll be able to navigate around that. So your role and goal here should be, to reduce the risk as much as possible. But if that is a constraint, then you have to definitely consider that. Okay. Okay, so I think Edward is saying go a little slower. I'll try to go a little slower. I'm sorry about that. I talk very fast, I guess. I'm really sorry. I'll try to go slower. Now, incentive drivers. And again, depending upon what is possible at your end, whether you have control on that, whether you can bring in your HR teams, sometimes that might be a possibility, but not always. So you need to look at that as well. You need to look at underlying resistance, and resistance could be all over the place. It could be beliefs, it could be so many different things. And sometimes people don't even say, what they are going to do. So you still need to read between the lines and understand where those resistances are coming from and create some sort of strategies around that. But if you don't have that, then you are going to run into a lot of different challenges. Okay, from the skill set perspective as well, if the key rules that you have, if they are not willing or cannot adopt, then you have to create some sort of a strategy around that. And if that is going to be a constraint, then that becomes a constraint on your target operating model as well. Okay, post implementation support, do you have that support capacity? Okay, that has to be part of your readiness exercise. And if you don't have that, then you need to look at systems that is not going to require as much help, I would say, in the post implementation phase. So Dan, hello Dan. So Dan is asking, okay, under behavioral issues, would you include willingness to customize? Now, willingness, how you need to analyze is, why are you customizing? That is the number one question you need to ask. Okay, do you have unique processes? If you have unique processes, then there may be a possibility that you need to customize. But have you done your research and found the right system? That's going to be the second thing that you need to ask yourself. Maybe you got a system that provides you 60% of the capabilities, and then you are trying to customize 40% of that. Willingness also mean financial alignment. Do you have enough money, budget, internal maturity? Do you have that? So would you put that under skill set? I don't know. That would be, what is your maturity in terms of these customization? Have you designed any scalable systems in the past? Do you have any sort of ERP background internally, or you have hired a bunch of developers? They don't necessarily have formal education in software engineering or architecture. Then you are probably going to run into a lot of challenges. You can't figure these things out from interns, I guess. So again, customization is easy. A lot of people can do that, but creating scalable processes, scalable systems is very, very, very hard. It's a very expensive process. So again, I don't know, Jen, if that answers your question, but you need to go deeper into these questions. And again, training requirements and training, again, you need to train yourself first on the ERP taxonomy, enterprise software taxonomy. And if you're not trained on that, you will not be able to perform gap analysis. If you're not able to do that, then you are probably going to run into challenges. From business users' perspective, they are the ones who are making these decisions from their process perspective. And if they are not trained, obviously, there are going to be a lot of different challenges. Okay. So thank you, Dan. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so this is legal and operational readiness, the kind of things that you need to look at and the implications that you are going to have. So here you are looking at real long-term contract risks. Okay, and you would not know that unless you understand your target operating model, unless you understand the enterprise architecture. You have those things figured out in your readiness phase, because nobody can predict these licensing requirements. Even if you do everything, you are still going to find surprises, because the constraints are going to be at the business object level. How many transactions can they support? How many emails can they support? And unless you have this design, nobody can predict the cost. Okay, what you are getting with those SOWs are just estimates, and they are going to fire back. And in most cases, they do fire back. So the more work you are going to put in your readiness phase, doesn't matter how you do it, you have to do it. Okay, the fewer surprises you are going to find from the long-term contract risk perspective. Tool charges sometimes could be very interesting as well. When people look at this, they are only going to look at, from one system perspective. Okay, what is the cost of my ERP, and rest of the integrations, add-on charges, I'll figure out later. And the object model that you have, the licensing model that you have, the pricing, etc., that is all a factor in analyzing how much toll charges or overages you are going to get. And sometimes you are going to have these fine lines in the contract, and you might not understand, and you might commit to that contract, and tomorrow you are going to get a bill of $1 million. Because of those toll charges that were not planned, and then you cannot do anything about it. So you need to analyze all of that. These are the risks that we are talking about. Staffing requirements, you need to analyze that as well, and that would be kind of risks that you need to think about. Unpredictable implementation cost, I have already touched on that. And then finally, even if you do everything right, then you might have operational disruptions if you don't go through this phase, which is going to be either premature go lives. ERP community loves to talk about, they can go live in 3 days, 24 hours, 3 months, 6 months. It doesn't matter what is the timeline. Okay, you can go live within a second. But the point is, how premature that is going to be, how bad that is going to fire back is going to be a question. And that question you need to ask yourself, whenever you go live. Okay, are you ready enough? And that's the intent of ERP readiness. Obviously, everybody talks about training, change management, how critical that is. But unless you go through the process, it's very hard to train. They won't understand these things, even if you are doing, I don't know, maybe 10 modules of training on ERP concepts. That's not going to help. Unless you go through this process, they will not be able to understand underlying decisions, the way you are making these decisions. If you don't take them through the process, they will struggle. They will not be ready to change their processes. They will not adapt to those processes either. Okay, so we have one question here. What's one legal or contractual blind spot you have seen derail ERP programs, even when the technology and processes were well designed? So I'll give you a story, Srestha. So in this case, this is a customer, mid-market customer. They have gone through the whole process. They had, hired ERP selection consulting firm. Great company, great brand. No, sort of problems there. The only thing that they had missed is, until the selection phase, they had gone through the recommendation from this company. Okay, let's go with number one that these guys are recommending. What could go wrong in this particular case, right? So when they signed the contract, they forgot that they had to review the contract with the consulting company, and they were thinking that the price is increasing, the cost is increasing from the consulting perspective. So they wanted to avoid that, okay, I already know which system I want to go with. And finally, they did all the TCO analysis, everything. They had everything down, got everything in writing from the vendor. But within, I would say, 6 months, they received a bill for roughly $600,000. They came back again to us that, okay, why did I receive this bill? Because that we have worked in this particular process. We had gone through the ERP selection phase, and again, that was because of the blind spot, the toll charges. So, I mean, this is just one case. I mean, this happens every single day with these kind of implementations. Hopefully that answers your question. So now I'll go over some of these things from the operational disruption perspective. Obviously, you're going to have some of the technical errors as well, but sometimes those technical errors could be that you are fixing something just to create some more errors, I guess. So it might feel like a cyclical process, and that's very natural with most ERP implementations. So again, the more work you are going to put in the readiness phase, the fewer surprises you are going to get. And any sort of system dependencies, unless you are going to take the comprehensive approach for this, you are going to find a lot of different surprises. So that was legal and operational. So I'm going to move to the next one. So these things, when you look at the interconnectedness of these things, a lot of companies talk about, hey, you need to figure out your business processes. Okay, sometimes they feel that, okay, you need to do data as well, but how much data are you going to do in the selection phase? Readiness phase is where the play is. Sometimes they feel that, you know what, it is vendor's responsibility to do technology. It's not our responsibility because we are the business strategy firm, whatever that means, I don't know. So obviously you are going to find a lot of challenges because they are going to do this. They might do a little bit of this, but they are probably going to skip this just because that requires a lot of implementation expertise, and they are going to rely on vendors to do these two things in the implementation phase after the contract is signed. Now, with that approach, you are going to run into a lot of challenges because whatever constraints you are going to run into here, okay, that impacts your targeted state. And if you don't accommodate that in your decision matrix and decision making, then you will find surprises. So the whole process is very interconnected, the way this works. So from the process perspective, you're looking at interaction, validation, communication, reconciliation, cross-functional ownership. I don't care whether you use some sort of AI native, AI agent, AI process, human system, whatever it is. Okay, you need to accommodate as part of your business process planning in enterprise architecture planning. If that is not included as part of the mix, that means you are missing something, and you are probably going to find surprises. Repeatability versus cutting edge. And again, that's the decision that you need to make from your perspective. Okay, why are you calling something cutting edge? Is that really cutting edge from the business model perspective? So these are some hard questions. And once you put dollar amount on those cutting edge, does it even matter? So those are the questions that you need to ask. Okay. Then again, when you do the fit gap analysis, you need to align with enterprise software. You need to do this in number one, agnostic manner, but then you need to also align with the target system because each system, each version is very different. And if that is not aligned, again, you'll run into challenges. Cost, time, skills required. So those are going to be some of the factors that you need to analyze. Now, from the data perspective, it's not just one data set. It's going to be everything. So you need to look at master, transactional, historical, ownership, accountability, journeys. You need to look at all of that. Structured, unstructured. Don't dump everything inside ERP. That's going to fire back. The way ERP structures are designed, the way business rules are nested inside ERP, they are very hardwired. They are not designed to host every single data set there. So you need to design these processes, what you are keeping where, and what is going to be the responsibility of each of the data set, and what are going to be the journeys. Business, operational, technical, these are different data types. Again, you need to decide what belongs to ERP, what does not belong to ERP, and what kind of interaction model that you are going to have into all of that. You need to decide sovereignty, regulatory compliance, all of that. And again, from the data perspective as well, the taxonomy alignment is equally critical. Make sure you have that before you go through the actual selection technology procurement. Any sort of data security sharing requirement that is going to have some sort of impact on your ERP selection. So make sure you have that down. And again, these factors are going to be more from the organizational and from the change perspective. So that is going to be how committed the stakeholders are going to be. What is their qualification? Are they qualified to be the sponsor? If not, then what kind of training are you going to provide to them? Capacity for change versus daily operations, do you have that? So that's going to be more from the staffing perspective. You need to analyze that. Once you have the work items identified, then only you would know how much effort is going to be required from everybody. If you don't have that identified, then obviously you might run into challenges. So that's all part of ERP readiness. I mean, incentives, depending upon whether you can align that, depending upon how much clout you have, whether HR is involved, how big you are, how you operate. So all of those factors might be relevant there with respect to incentives. Any sort of change items that you have, whether the change is going to be in the way you are structuring your data at this point of time, business processes, how you are incorporating that, workflows. If you are doing AI centric initiatives, obviously you need to analyze all of that as well from those lens. Any sort of resistance management and conflicts, you need to do that. Whether you are hiring, replacing, reallocating, you need to analyze that as well. So again, this is all from the organizational and from the change perspective. Technology is easy once you do these three generally, but hopefully you have analyze this from the technical lenses as well, because that matters. They all are interconnected. So here you are looking at system limitation, the process constraints, all of that is going to be relevant. Integration complexity, again, once you have analyzed your workflows, kind of messages that you want to exchange between departments, between different systems, if you have analyzed all of that, then you would know what you are trying to accomplish from the ERP perspective. And any sort of technology details, you need to analyze that as well. But again, this thing is interconnected. So how to do this? Let's say if you are trying this on your own, or you want to do this, generally you are looking at some sort of secondary data analysis that you want to perform, that might take anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks, depending upon what kind of gaps you can find out, depending upon your skill set, expertise, who's involved in the process. But this one might take roughly 1 to 2 weeks. Okay. Then you want to do some sort of process discovery workshops. 90% of the companies, how they start this process is they jump right into this one. Everybody is going to have their own understanding, assumptions, stories, the way they are going to communicate. And sometimes that story is going to be incomplete. Okay. So you want to correlate this with what data is telling you. The more you are going to correlate, the more understanding you are going to have in reconciling these conflicts. Okay. So the whole idea of process discovery workshop is not just to understand the as processes. It's also going to be alignment overall, in coaching them how the target state is going to be, in coaching some of the fundamentals. So this is going to be very conversational, the way this is going to happen. So that's probably the second step. You will be making a lot of different decisions throughout the process. They are probably going to be make or break for your implementation. Each decision may take 1 to 2 weeks, and I'll show you a little sample in terms of how the decisioning framework looks like. And then you are going to have some sort of iterative model build. You are designing the model, combining all of these perspectives, and then coming up with that. And then finally, deliverables. Now, you might feel that, this is probably going to take forever. And some companies might claim that they can implement the whole ERP within 24 hours. But again, you are going to find all of those surprises if you don't go through this process. Sometimes readiness might take longer than the actual implementation, just because you need to be ready before you start any sort of implementation selection. And depending upon your own maturity, the time will vary. Okay, I'll go to this one. So some of the deliverables. Okay, so if you want some sort of tangible deliverables from this process, it's going to be some sort of project charter, and everybody does that, I guess. But in this case, the scope is going to be very different. The analysis is going to be very different as well. You are looking at some sort of stakeholder analysis matrix. You are looking at some sort of RACI chart. In terms of the alignment, and once you do all of that, the implementation is going to be much easier. It's probably going to have shorter timeline in general. Okay, you are looking at, again, the RAID log that you have, that is going to be from all of the perspectives combined from the business process, from data, from technology, etc. And based on that, you are documenting everything, even though you don't solve. You still want to make sure that that is fairly documented, accounted. Whoever decided tomorrow, if you get any sort of surprises, then you can go back and discuss that this is what we had decided. If the assumption or the context changes, then you can again rewire your operating model. Hopefully by that time you have not signed the contract. If you have signed, obviously then that is going to become one of the major constraints in your project. In this phase, you are going to get some sort of daily requirements discussion, alignment logs. That is going to be the output. You want to document as much as possible. That helps with the alignment clarity, so that everybody's aligned, hopefully. And then you are going to have some sort of state models that you are trying to create. Again, these are not necessarily vendor provided state models, because they look at everything from their perspective. This is your business model. This is your target operating model. Depending upon what you want to do, depending upon your constraints, depending upon your contract risks at this point of time, you will design your own model and then figure out how you want to enable that model using vendors' technology or solutions that they have. The stage gate analysis here, you are going to get some sort of decision models. You are going to update the REID log, because that's going to have impact on that. Some sort of discussion logs, and then state models as well. In phase 4, you are looking at the real model, depending upon how deep you want to go in that. But you want to have some version of process data systems. They go anywhere from level 1 to level 6. Your goal would be that you at least do level 1, because if you don't have that, then you are probably not going to have any sort of clarity. If you are limited on budget, you at least want to do text version. If you don't want any fancy graphs or charts, that's completely okay. Sometimes companies design charts and graphs, but they are all over the place as well. The intent here is to create the model that is going to be technically and financially feasible. It doesn't matter which format that is, whether that is going to be visual or text, whatever works for your team. Some sort of enterprise architecture as is to be, again, considering your dependencies, your constraints, your context, you are going to design enterprise architecture. Your goal is going to be to make it as vendor agnostic, as technology agnostic as possible, but you still have to align that with enterprise software dictionary, ERP dictionary, slightly more in the agnostic manner. It's not supposed to be as open-ended, because if it is open-ended, then again, you are going to run into risks when you try to bring in those enterprise software components. Obviously, your RAID is getting updated and discussion logs are getting updated as well. So those will be some of the deliverables. Final phase, if you have some alignment here, then you are going to work on all of these deliverables. Hopefully, it's going to give you all of the critical success factors that you need for the next phase, which is going to be either buy or build, depending upon what you are trying to do. If you're trying to buy, then hopefully that can drive your demos, that can drive your requirements matrix, etc. So that's going to be the output of this one. But then you are going to have models, finalized ones. You are going to have some sort of requirements matrix, some sort of portfolio planning, depending upon how many different components are involved. Sometimes it might not be possible to do all of those projects in one program. So you want to decide some priority based on your business case. So you are going to have that staffing plan, change management plan from the legacy migration perspective as well. Okay, if you guys don't have any other questions, I'll keep moving. So this is just one of the framework, from the decision model perspective, how you want to decide. So generally, when you look at the traditional selection methodology, they just feel that option number 2 is the best. That's given. They don't even talk about it. Okay, the way their processes are designed, they just assume that everything is going to go inside ERP. Now, depending upon your business model, industry, that may not always be the best idea. If you look at customers, this is what they want, which is going to be a disaster in general. Okay, so that is going to have extremely fragmented state of your data, your processes in too many data silos, and reconciling that, creating a unified story using this model will be extremely challenging. 90% of the customers want this. Okay, going from here to here is where the major challenge is. So you need to find some sort of middle ground. If you can get here, obviously that's the win. At least from the ERP core perspective. If you cannot do that, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do this? But again, you need to analyze the cost. So this is just one of the decision framework in terms of level of effort required. and operational efficiencies that you are going to get. So that could be one sample, but these are going to be different decision gate framework that you are going to use throughout the process, and that will alter the state of your target operating model completely and what you want to accomplish from ERP perspective as well. So next step for ERP buyers, I would say the first step always is find the compelling reason. If you don't have compelling reason, if you don't understand your business objectives, pain points, you are not ready for ERP, regardless of what anybody else says. So this is where you need to put a lot of thinking, effort to figure out why do you want ERP. That should be the first question. Perform a good audit of your current processes. That's what you want to do. If you are not doing that, then you are probably going to run into challenges. You really need to understand your current context, current landscape, current habits of your users. If you don't have good understanding of that, then you are probably going to run into challenges. And again, ERP taxonomies, they are not optional. You do require ERP subject matter expertise to be able to build the target state, and you want to align with that as much as possible. It's not meant to be completely custom, completely open-ended. If you do completely open-ended, then also you will run into challenges. So make sure you build that consensus. And again, if you don't have that subject matter expertise internally, you can work with one of the independent advisory firm. Again, the whole process is meant to be technology agnostic, solution agnostic, to figure out your own target operating model, because that dictates the state and scope of ERP. So that's it for the presentation. I'm actually going to stop the sharing right now so we can open up for any sort of questions, comments. Do you guys have any questions, comments? No, I'm not seeing anything. Just anything from your side? If not, we can wrap. I think we have some questions here. Okay, so Gianluca, you are saying that integration is the keyword. I mean, depending upon how you define integration, generally integration get bundled under some sort of technical magic. Integration is a lot more than that. Okay, integration does require alignment from the business process perspective, understanding the scope, residency requirement, from the process perspective as well as from data perspective. Okay, integration impacts your business model as well. So again, integration is the keyword, but it's also a $1 million question, and that's where the whole readiness exercises is really helpful in figuring out, how many integration challenges you are going to get. Taxonomy alignment is the second keyword. That's probably the takeaway that I want everybody to take from this session. If you are not aligned there, if you don't understand how taxonomies work in the enterprise software space, and there are roughly 200 different categories, you need to understand each of those to understand where ERP belongs. Process alignment, of course, data strategy is the fourth. One question: what about integration platform? Again, platform is the enabler. That just serves your target operating model. Once you define that, then you can figure out, sometimes integration platforms are going to be provided by the vendors. If it is bundled as part of that, okay, what is your vendor risk? Can you afford to take that? Okay, if not, then if you are going to use a third-party integration tool, okay, can you afford to build on that? So these are the questions that you need to ask yourself to come up with the strategy, what is going to be the right fit for you. Okay, any website can you recommend to obtain one-click checklist? I mean, elevateiq.com is probably the best website you are going to find. Sorry, shameless plug, but obviously there are a million on the internet as well. You just need to look for ERP selection checklist and you'll find million options there. Okay, to what level do you recommend we document our as-is processes versus focus on our to-be processes, depending upon how much gap you are sensing with your users? If everybody feels great, this could be a red flag. Because sometimes people just say, but they don't mean that. So you need to read between the lines. You need to understand whether they are really comfortable, they are speaking their mind, or they are simply pumped because they are excited about technology. If somebody is excited about technology, they have no idea, what is going to be required for these implementations. So overexcitement could be a red flag. Now, what level do you want to go with the as-is process? Good enough that it is going to have some sort of legs. It's not going to have any sort of assumptions, hopefully. Hopefully you have documented all of those assumptions and blind spots. And that is going to provide some sort of alignment among teams, and then from the to-be process perspective as well, you are not going to have as much steep learning curve. So again, this process is meant to be extremely tailored for every single company. So the level of detail would depend upon your current skill set, your current contact, current data, your current maturity, everything combined, I would say. Yeah. Also time pressure. I mean, how fast do you want to go there? Some people are slow, some people are fast. Some people learn fast, some people are slow. So again, all of those factors. Any other questions, comments? Okay, so one comment here. Example, SAP B1 and Informatica CDI platform, they are vendor decoupling. So again, when we look at SAP B1 and Informatica CDI platform, something is off there, because Informatica is a very enterprise play in our mind. SAP B1 is a very small to medium sized platform. So you want to align that as much as possible. You don't want to pick one tool from enterprise marketplace and one from your SMB. That might not go as well. Okay. Yes, it could be the example of vendor decoupling, but depending upon how many vendors you are trying to avoid, and how aligned they are from their strategy perspective as well, because everything is kind of alliances in the software world. So you need to understand those alliances as well. Sometimes they are going to have synergies. So you don't want to miss on those synergies, but you still want to analyze the risks associated with those synergies as well. More questions, comments? If you guys don't have that, that's it for the session. I know it was fast paced, but it's very hard to cover these sessions in an hour. So hopefully that was helpful, informative, and answered the questions that you are looking for. We do these webinars, weekly. For the process ones, we are doing every other week. We are going to have that on our page, which is the events and webinar on elevateiq.com. And you can subscribe to our newsletter as well. On that note, thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.